Welcome to the Acquivore podcast. I'm your host, Don Mansfield. I'm here with Nick Sanders and Jennifer Townsend. This podcast is brought to you by Don Acquisition. Don Acquisition is a government contract training provider. We also do consulting and expert witness services. Check us out at donacquisition.com. Also brought to you by contracting courses. Jennifer, you want to tell us about contracting courses?
Yes, I am the owner, operator, and presently still employee of Contracting Courses. Basically, and I do not do consulting or expert witnessing.
Yeah.
Yeah, Don says yet, which hopefully I prefer just the instructing because it's a lot of work just to write one good course, much less several, and I enjoy doing that. So right now I have two main courses, which is contracting clauses, the FAR clauses and provisions, and then one on government commercial contracts, how FAR Part 12 is actually not really truly commercial, nor is it non-commercial either. So interesting stuff.
All right. And Nick Sanders.
Howdy, everybody. Nick Sanders here. There's my website. It doesn't have pretty pictures like other people's here. And what my site mostly is at this point is my blog, which has been active for about 11 years, has well more than 1 million words of content on various aspects of federal and state acquisition issues, current events, things like that, things that catch my eye. I do consult through Apogee Consulting, thus the name, and training a little bit, but not at the level that Don and Jennifer do. So thank you.
So Nick's got a wealth of government contractor experience. Jennifer's got a wealth of government experience. So we're lucky to have them both. All right. So Jennifer had some questions for us tonight, and I'm going to turn it over to her.
All right. So basically, as I've been doing an even deeper dive into the FAR clauses, because I'm never satisfied with what I already have, at some point I started having questions, and then I just started, jotting down all of my questions associated with not just the clauses, but with just the FAR and some government stuff in general. So my first issue, I guess, I don't know if it's a question. I'll start with my issue of it, and then we can phrase it as a question. But for those of you who are not dinosaurs like myself, and I'm pretty sure Don and Nick are both dinosauric enough to remember the days of the Commerce Business Daily, when I very first started in the government in the mid 90s, they were still publishing the Commerce Business Daily as a newspaper pamphlet kind of a publication. And even though, because the internet hadn't really been fully invented yet or whatever, it was being fleshed out at that point in time. And so at some point, in the then later 90s, the Commerce Business Daily was replaced with the website, and I believe it was called FedBizOps for some period of time. And that website was an early website, and there were character limits and limitations on the website. Which those are going to come back into play here in some of my questions. And then at some point, FedBizOps was overtaken by SAM or Beta SAM. And so that's now when we publicize everything, we publicize it on Beta SAM. And this has been a long march of approximately 20 to 25 years now. And in that 20 to 25 years, FAR Part 5 has changed the name of the CBD to FedBizOps, and now, does it actually say Beta SAM yet, or does it still, it probably says government-wide point of entry, because at some point they said, well, the name is going to keep changing, so we'll just call it the government-wide point of entry. So basically, this is what, like, I just kind of have an issue with, like, at some point, as things change over time incrementally, um, at some point it seems like it makes sense to come back and look at the big picture. So this is my question in relation to the big picture. So way back in the day, and still today, 25 years later, there was something called a synopsis. Well, what is a synopsis? It's a very brief paragraph or so with some pertinent points about a forthcoming business opportunity, or a contract or a solicitation, or a request for bids, those sorts of things. And the synopsis is supposed to be, and it still is the same in FAR Part 5, published 15 days before the release of the solicitation. And then 15 days after you publish the synopsis, then you can release the solicitation. And then the solicitation has to be open for 30 or 45 days, depending on, whether it's subject to trade agreements or, that sort of thing. And so the issue I have with this is, back in the day when we first had synopses, this was because it would be published literally hard copy in the Commerce Business Daily, and contractors would have to get their copy of the Commerce Business Daily, and here I'll illustrate with this tab, like leaf through it until they find, oh, this is a business opportunity I'm interested in. And at that point in time, they couldn't really email the contracting officer. They would send a letter, or sometimes they would call the contracting officer and get put on the interested parties list. And then the contracting officer would keep a list of everyone who they were going to send the solicitation to. And so then 15 days later, when the solicitation was released, and again, this was back in the day, I did this on my first couple of solicitations, we would print a whole bunch of copies, and there would be a collation party as you stapled all the solicitations together, and then you would mail them off to the parties that had written in to get onto your interested parties list. Well, now I'm wondering why we still synopsize things, because there's really not a need to, like, have this, look for stuff. I mean, now businesses can go to FedBizOps or SAM, Beta SAM, and they can register for under NAICS code, or even agencies. They can look every single day. They can get solicitation information emailed to them directly. They can be notified of opportunities, and they can, in theory, they could read the solicitation that same day. And so it doesn't, again, it just seems like, I just am wondering why we still have this 15-day time period. So this was the first thing I wanted to talk about. So I'll stop talking for a minute and let Don and Nick talk, and then I'll inject as we see fit.
Yeah, I think it's a relic. A 15-day period to me does not seem necessary. I think if you notified a contractor that a solicit, or they subscribed to the FedBizOps and they knew a solicitation was coming out, they want it. They don't want to wait. So I don't know why you'd need to wait 15 days if you publish something on FedBizOps, and they were subscribed and they got notified. Just send them the solicitation. Why wait 15 days? And I think when they were putting in the rules for commercial items, they kind of asked that question, like, why wait 15 days? And then they said, well, it doesn't make sense to wait 15 days. So let's just allow them to do whatever makes sense as far as a period between synopsis and solicitation. But I don't know, maybe contractors need that time. I don't know. Nick, what do you say?
No, they don't. So that was easy. So I was thinking when you're talking, there's this new thing now that everyone's talking about called PALT, right? PALT. And I'm wondering, do they measure it from the time the solicitation is issued, or do they measure it from the time the synopsis is published?
There's no standard measure that I know of.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking if they mandated PALT be measured as the time from the synopsis to the contract award, then somebody could get their distinguished metal of contracting or whatever by saying, hey, I can save 15 days from Paul just by not doing synopsizing anymore. And that would
Yeah.
be that would be a
Yeah.
forced function to sort of get rid of it, because it doesn't add any value. It's a relic, and it's ridiculous. There's no reason to have it, and there's no value. I'm not aware of any value. You're not aware of any value. Let's get rid of it.
Yeah.
Why add one more wrinkle to this thing that's already complicated enough?
Yeah.
Yeah, and in my
Complexity.
mind, I'm thinking, why am I the first one asking this? Why didn't some, I mean, because Paul, I mean, procurement action lead time at Paul, is a big deal because it takes the federal government a long time to award, contracts. And,
Yeah.
some places it takes 3 or 4 years, sadly, to
Right.
award a contract.
Right. So I
So
wanted to mention though,
go ahead.
Jennifer, that from a contractor point of view, it's an axiom that if the first time you hear about an opportunity is when the solicitation is issued, don't bother bidding, you've already lost. Right? Everyone, they talk about campaigns, they talk about captures. Everybody is tracking opportunities as early as they can so they can we talked about this earlier. They can lock up their teams, right? Have their teaming agreements all negotiated in place, have everybody aligned so that when the solicitation does hit, they're already in motion. There's no ramp up. And so this notion that they need 15 extra days is just completely false from my point of view, because they already probably have 6 months or a year ahead of it. They've looked at the budget lines. They've gone to all the conferences where all the brass are speaking. They've talked to anybody they can in SADBU or anything else, and they probably have a really good notion of what opportunities are going to drop that government fiscal year. They may not know the right date, but they know what they're targeting, and so they don't need the 15 days. If they're not already in action before that, they're not savvy, sophisticated contractors.
That was my sense. Before when we were discussing beforehand via email, the topic for tonight's podcast, I had suggested this, and I of course had worded this topic in a very contracting officer kind of a way. And so Nick had come back and been like, oh, I don't know if I have anything to add. And I'm like, oh no, I actually had Nick in mind when I was writing some of these questions, because on the government side, we don't really know how valuable contractors find these things. And that was one of my other questions to Nick, is like, how valuable is beta SAM anyways? I mean, how do contractors actually get their information about these solicitations? And now Nick normally does business with the big guys, so his answer might be, skewed that way. But so you talked a little bit about that, but I was curious. I mean, one of my questions is, don't these large guys just track all the large contracts anyways?
Yeah, they do. Now, beta SAM is good for getting the solicitation itself when the time is right, right? They're gonna get it. We don't do bidders lists anymore, or what you call them, lists of interested parties. We always called them bidders lists. The people who are going to be invited to the kickoff meeting held at the agency where they could start asking their questions of the contracting officer. Those days, not too many are those anymore, right? Um, schedule your site walk early. So yeah, the big guys are tracking it easily 6 months in advance. I mean, we had a thought at some of the big companies, I won't name them, that if you weren't in there helping shape the draft RFP, you really didn't know what was happening. So that was always the goal. Get there, start working with the requiring agency on the draft RFP and see if you can't shape it in a way that's favorable, gives you a chance to win.
Yeah, that's a new concept that I had to learn when I went to industry, is shaping.
Yeah.
It's like not talked about in the FAR, but it's a huge part of going after contracts.
Yeah. They're budgeting and targeting their proposal efforts a year in advance, maybe
Mhm.
in some cases. And then the government announces, oh, this is going to slip, it's going to be delayed, and everyone has a panic attack. So, yeah, I mean, you're absolutely, both of you are right. It's the synopsis needs to go unless somebody could actually, we ought to like make somebody defend it. That ought to be the strategy. Defend why this even exists.
Well, and there's some other relics linked to this. I didn't actually put this in my text earlier, but that I shouldn't, I'm calling it a relic, but like the 5 year forecasts the agencies are supposed to publish, does anybody even look at those on the industry side? I mean, that's a small business act requirement, I think, because the theory is it allows small businesses 5 years out to target something and go after it.
Yeah,
But
small business can't think 5 weeks ahead, let alone 5 years. But I'm not willing to say that nobody looks at that. I mean, I think the bigs actually look at it. I mean, they're looking for any intelligence they can get about what the agency's up to and where the dollars are being programmed. Um,
well, there's certainly more than 5 years worth of data on formerly FedBizOps and Beta SAM. I think they transitioned all the FedBizOps data into Beta SAM. And so in theory, you could, data mine that as a large business or even data mine FPDS public information. And do contractors do that? Do they data mine like, oh, I want to see all the contracts over 10 billion or, whatever it is?
well, I will say that Don helped me go through an exercise for one of my clients, about 2, 3 months ago, where we went through an agency's budget line items. I guess I hope I'm describing that right, Don. You probably have the correct terms.
Yeah, yeah.
And we went through it line item by line item, trying to find this one procurement my client was interested in to see what the fiscal dollar funding was associated with it. Was it current year money only, no year money? What was it? So we spent, I don't know, I mean, Don probably spent 5 minutes, but I probably spent, a couple hours searching through that agency's budget to see exactly what it could tell me. So I think the bottom line is any intelligence is probably going to be useful to somebody.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Okay. Go ahead.
I'm just going to say I do know of this company, GovTribe, that makes a living mining data from FPDS and FedBizOps and things like that.
Well, and there's certainly more than that company because once I signed up on SAM, I started getting like
Yeah.
emails from all kinds of people like, oh, we can send you this, we can send you opportunities that are open for free or not for free, but for a fee. And in
Right.
my mind, I'm like, well, I used to work for the government. I'm quite familiar with
Right.
Sam, and I don't think I need to pay anybody any money to find this stuff for me. Especially because what they sent me, in theory, they were showing me their sophistication by sending me things that I would be interested in based on the NAICS codes that I had registered in. But it was stuff like, major base operations. And I'm like, that has nothing to do with contracting training. It was just way off the mark.
Yeah.
It's funny. And I'm pretty sure
So,
you probably don't want to end up as a federal government contractor yourself, Jennifer, but maybe I'm wrong about that. You'd
well,
rather train.
that's what I am now, actually, because I'm
Oh,
targeting
really?
mostly
Okay.
to government employees, but it's very niche. That's why I'm like training.
See,
Um,
there's the Don's number in the cage code, Nick. Don't forget it.
Yeah, I put it well because that was actually my pet peeve as a contracting officer is I could never find the duns in the cage, and I
Uh-huh.
didn't want to have to like go and search Sam, because a lot of companies have the same name as others, and so I'd be
Yeah.
like, is this the right one?
That's
And then you go to the website and can never find it on there. So notice when I design mine, I'm all bing bing right at the
that's
We're gonna have
funny
to
though,
steal that one
Jennifer,
from you
because
too.
I have no interest in ever being a federal government contractor. I want to help contractors. I don't want to be one.
Well, I definitely want to help contractors. And, my mind, I like as I get all these emails and I think to myself, contractors are obviously buying these services, which to me just seems like I shouldn't say it's a shame because obviously it's supporting some small businesses or possibly large businesses. But in my mind, just with some good training out there, contractors could get a lot more information just on their own and probably more valuable information. So,
Well, maybe. I mean, I don't want to argue with you about the point, but there's always a cost benefit analysis that goes into it, right? So if somebody is a marketing whiz at a contractor, what's the best use of their scarce time? And it may not be searching Beta SAM or whatever, FPDS. It may be, I'm going to hire someone to do it and get a report because I don't have time to do it other than that. And I think that's probably true even for the small companies, maybe more so. They just don't have the resources.
they could hire Don as a consultant because Don could probably get good data for him.
I have
But
done that. I have
what I am saying is that these large businesses, like this GovTribe or whatever, I think they're doing data mining using algorithms, which isn't as useful as having the actual
Right.
brain there,
Well,
if that
let
makes
me, on
sense.
your both of your behalf, now point out to anybody watching this podcast, there are two people here, Jennifer and Don, who are really good at this, and they'll probably cut you a break on their hourly rate if you engage with them to have them research for you. They're experts at this. They'll go really fast and get you good data that won't be tainted by a broken AI algorithm. There. Now, what's
And
my
for,
But it
finder's
will
fee
be
for that,
tainted
guys?
by perhaps flawed government input. But anyways,
What's my finder's fee for you guys? I want 10%.
you might get the subcontract, Nick.
Yeah, right. Um,
so
anyway, I feel like you've come across a really good point, and your question was, why has no one raised this? Because how many people question the status quo? Not it's not human nature. They just accept it as being the way things are.
Right.
So I think the 15 days is related to two things, if I recall. I didn't dig deep enough to like dig it out, but I'm pretty sure the 15 days was related to obviously the Competition and Contracting Act and the desire to maximize competition and then create this bidders list or, interested parties list. But I think it was also related to, I think it was supposed to allow subcontractors or potential subcontractors, like smaller businesses who maybe couldn't qualify for the contract on their own to team or to at least seek out and go to a large business. Don's pointing it out right there. So yeah, it is related to the Small Business Act,
Mhm.
that they're supposed to then have this time to find the large business to team up with before the solicitation is released.
In the
So
15-day
again,
period, really, in the 15-day period, that's going to happen.
well, in theory, I guess.
No,
And so that's
it's
why I was going
not.
to
You're right.
ask Nick, like, what is your experience with this?
Let's see, 15 days. Let's see how that would work. Day one, I contact somebody at the prime. I'm a small business, want to be a subcontractor. Day one, I contact somebody at the prime. Prime says, let me think. On day two or day three, they send you an application to be join their approved vendors list. When that's done, that'll take, I don't know, 2 months, 3 months. Then after that, they'll send you a draft teaming agreement or a draft subcontract that you and the lawyers will argue about for weeks. 15 days. No, it's not happening in 15 days. It's just not. It's not even, again, the savvy subcontractors, they've already teamed up with their primes, right? And they've already made their pitches to the primes well before anybody's synopsized anything. And the prime, the marketing people at the primes have locked down their teams 2, 3, 4 months in advance. They're not waiting for the last 2 weeks. It's just not real. And small businesses who think that they're going to lock up with the prime from zero, I don't know who you are, to 60, we're working together in a productive relationship, a partnership. That's not happening in 15 days. You'd be lucky if it happens in 15 months. And
So Nick,
especially
I'm sorry.
manufacturing, maybe for services, maybe services go faster. But manufacturing, there is no way on God's green earth you're getting on somebody's approved vendor list until they fully, thoroughly audited your quality control system and now your counterfeit electronic part detection system and now your cybersecurity system, right? That it's just not happening. No one's going to take a risk on some unknown person. That could be the back door the Russians or the Chinese come in through. No, thank you, ma'am. Not happening.
So Nick, one of the things you told me when we were over in England is that in the UK there's more guidelines than strict rules on how to do everything. So what would you think if it just said the agency shall announce solicitations and give offers a reasonable amount of time to submit a proposal, and that was it? Would you trust contracting officers to act fairly, or do you think there's a need for these
Why
timelines?
wouldn't? No, I would trust them to act fairly. Why wouldn't they? Unless there's some kind of corruption going on that would get people fired or tossed in a prison. No, I would trust them because they're I don't know what your experience is being contracting officers, but my experience working with them is they have way too much work and they just want to get it out the door as quickly as they can and move on to the next thing because there's a pile in their inbox they've got to get to. So, yeah, I mean, fundamentally, number one, anything we can do to reduce their burden by throwing out non-value added tasks ought to be seriously considered, period. And number two, yeah, unless there's a reason that they wouldn't just do a good job getting the solicitation out and giving people a fair time to propose on it, it'd be fine. I don't see that they're going to have a problem. What is going to cause a problem are amendments to the solicitation. That's where you get the problems. Why is something being amended? What went wrong the first time? It was reviewed and approved before it was issued. Now, why are you amending it? Right? That's where people kind of raise their eyebrows and say, is somebody biasing the solicitation towards a particular offerer through an amendment?
Yeah, that's a whole other can of worms, which we could probably, frankly, spend the rest of the night discussing because I think there are some things related to this, which is, I mean, I think all three of us can probably resoundingly agree that in general, the quality of solicitations that are released are not good. And so they end up getting amended substantially more than they should be, which then causes a whole additional amount of work and hassle as it goes along.
Nick,
So
Why can't we track that metric? Isn't that a key performance indicator that a head of contracting activities tracking on his or her shop and saying, oh, I got this person over here who's issuing 3 times more amendments than anybody else. Let me counsel that person.
Well, there's certainly been a lot. Oh, go ahead, Don.
Would it be their fault? Is it necessarily the contracting person's fault? It could be requirements are changing.
Who's got the certificate of appointment?
Right, but they're serving a customer whose requirements may be dynamic, and they're just trying to keep up with it.
Well, that's certainly a viable reason. But I'll tell you, every time that's amended, over on the contractor side, eyebrows are raised. Even if it's legitimately for a good reason, there's a certain suspicion meter that starts to peg. And the more you see it amended, especially right before the due date without an extension, the more you see it, the more the suspicions are that somebody is getting a benefit through those amendments. And it's not the requiring activity. There's some offerer who's figured out how to push it, or sorry, what's the word we were using? Shape it.
Yeah.
It's advantageous.
I've witnessed that kind of suspicion, and having been on the government side, I can say that the people way overestimate how much that goes on within the government. Like very rarely is it like, oh, how do we change this so we can award to this guy? That almost never happens. It's usually you're trying to fix some error that you may lose out on in a protest, or there's just I've never seen that. I don't know, maybe Jennifer has, but like change a solicitation so we can get it to a certain contractor. I've never seen that.
Yeah, I haven't really seen it either, at least not on the contracting officer side. Now, does that happen on the requirements community side? Maybe, and I've been suspicious of that myself a couple of times. I ask her, oh, why are we changing this? But I think there's a lot more emphasis on PALT than the contractor community realizes. And a lot of that emphasis on PALT, I mean, Don and I, where we were largely where we worked together, PALT was being measured way back in the day. So it was shocking to me to go places where it was not being measured. I'm like, why is nobody measuring this? We need to hold these people to a standard. So the fact that it's getting measured more actively now is a good thing. But there's a lot of issues with PALT that a lot of places haven't yet really thought through, which is how defined is your requirement? Was the requirement shaped exclusively by the incumbent? And therefore, when it gets released, only the incumbent actually really knows the Greek that's in the statement of work masquerading as, something that everybody could feasibly do or perform against. So there's a lot of issues there, but I think that, for me, going back to just this particular issue, I think this 15-day time period needs to be relooked at. I certainly don't think it's adding a whole lot to the Competition and Contracting Act. I think you could release, in theory, if you could release the solicitation on day one and have an extra 15 days of the solicitation out there, for people to make comments, or, even shorten the whole, publicizing and contract solicitation time period by 15 days. I think everybody would be in favor of that. The question then becomes, is there some other way or a better, and I think there is. I mean, that would be a whole separate podcast, but is there a better way to get small businesses in touch with potential large businesses? Is there a better way to maybe make solicitations not require so many amendments? Yeah, I think there's a better way to do all of that, but I certainly think we're ripe to relook at this 15 days synopsis time period and whether a synopsis is really accomplishing any of the original goals that it was intended to accomplish. And if it's not, then check it out. It's my opinion.
On what you just said, I would say that when I worked for primes, they were always seeking qualified small businesses and small disadvantage, all the various flavors of socioeconomic smalls. They were always looking for them. Number one, they had small business plans with goals. And of course, we haven't done a podcast yet on what good faith efforts now means. You can do that. But anyway, they were really making good faith efforts to find, they were searching on their own. And when I work with the smalls, they're searching on their own for the primes. They don't need any help. It's already, the ecosystem's already active. And so this notion that, oh, we have to facilitate this thing is false. It's already happening. It's especially when you have a solicitation where social economic participation might be an evaluation criterion, as we've seen from time to time. Believe me, it's happening. They don't need any extra help. So I just, frankly, I reject the whole notion that of what we're looking at here, that the small businesses need to have some regulatory help and the primes need to be held to the feet to the fire, regulatorily speaking. No, they're already doing that. They want to win the award. If they lock up the right subcontractor, then they're going to have a better chance of winning. It's just the way it is. You don't, I mean, I hate to be all not really this way, but, free market is already working here. We don't need any government intervention. And I wouldn't say that about many things, but on this particular topic, I definitely would.
So are you specifically talking about small business subcontracting?
I'm talking about this notion that as required by the Small Business Act and the OFPP policy, or the OFP Policy Act, we need to do a synopsis so as to facilitate something that's already happening anyway.
Hmm.
That's what I'm rejecting, is the notion that 5.101 right in front of me here on the screen. I don't think it's required, and I don't think it has any value. And I'm just going to agree with Jennifer. It's a relic that needs to go.
It probably did add value back when it was a paper copy and there was yellow pages, such a thing as actual yellow pages, and trying to find businesses across the country, but this is a different age. I would say it's certainly a different age. So.
Yeah, I
Right.
mean, the FAR council is very slow to get, like, just a couple years ago, they took out the coverage of telegraphic bids. Yeah, like, I'd say 2 or
Hurt
3
me,
years
Don,
ago.
when they did that, because I had to give up my telegraph at that time.
Yeah, seriously.
But here, the thing of it is if I'm a small business, let's say I'm a small in San Diego, I'm already connected with the NAVC and all the other NAVs over here in San Diego. All their small business specialists, I'm already on their list. I'm already going to everything. Those guys host a party where some admiral's going to speak about budgetary priorities over the next 3 years. They're already there. They're already signed up to go. They don't need this. And then when the primes come in, they're going to go call somebody in that small business liaison office and say, send me a list of who's got expertise in this area, right? Even if they really don't need to do that, but if they did need to do that, that's how it would work.
Mm-hmm.
This all is just completely, it's
yeah,
like,
I'm going to qualify what you're saying,
nice.
Nick, though.
You're being nice and saying it might have been required at one point. You're a nice person. I'm not sure it was ever required, but it's certainly not required in 2021.
I think we're probably safe saying, though, that the small businesses that the primes would actually want to do business with are already there. There's probably still a category of small businesses that just are stumbling around, wondering where their piece of the government pie is. But they need to, I guess, go to the PTAC.
Well, no, I mean, a true story. I'll share an anecdote. When I was with the Prime, we would do small business fairs, small business outreach things, right? Trying to sign, you have to under your small business plan, but, to show good faith. So we'd throw we rent a hotel conference room or whatever, and, we'd throw it all out. And you had no idea the people we had hairdressers show up looking for a subcontracting opportunity. I kid you not.
Did you hire them? You could probably count it. Free hair.
Yes, we could have. We could have, but there has to be a value add to the procurement. Unless it was a hair salon service at a base, we probably weren't going to connect with them. But that's an example of, you're talking about small businesses stumbling around looking for their piece of the pie. Yes, but how realistic are they ever going to get a piece of the pie? And I think Don mentioned PTAC. Yes, you're right. PTAC does a great service. And there are other services. And they could call Don or Jennifer and, get a half hour of advice on what they should be doing. Another plug with another finder's fee. But some of these people are clueless, and they're always going to be clueless, right? I don't know how to say, it sounds harsh. I'm sorry if it does. My heart goes out to them. I want them to do well. That's why I'm in the consulting business. But you got to have some clue. If you don't even have a clue, this business is not for you. Like, I'm going to have a T-shirt that says that way. If you don't have a clue, the business is not for you. I'm going to put that on my website. People, you can buy it for $25 a shirt.
Well, sign me up.
I'm sorry, but that's how I see it.
So While we're here, Don also has one of the other things I'm questioning and have been questioning for quite some time, which is that 5.101A2, which this to me is also a relic of the pre-Oklahoma City bombing days or whatever else. But it says for proposed contract actions expected to exceed 15,000, but not expected to exceed 25,000 by displaying in a public place. So again, back in the day, back when I first started, you could drive on to base and you could walk into, not necessarily the whole place, but you could walk into the small business office and not have to go through layers of security and gates with, swipe access and all of that kind of stuff. And I think that was true of most places. And most small business offices did, in fact, have a bulletin board where they would post, these smaller requirements. And I don't think those even exist anymore. I mean, because you can't, it takes like an act of God these days to get access to any kind of government installation. So what do you guys think? Is this a relic, or because what my assertion is, we should just put it all on the computer, and that's a pretty public place these days.
Yeah. When I started, we had a bid board, and then the first place I started was 1995, and then eventually people got caught up, and there's no more bid board, right? And then I moved to a new activity in like 2003 that was a little bit behind the times, and they had a bid board. And people would come in and look at the bid board. They'd see like what opportunities were in place. But we eventually got rid of that too. Yeah, so I don't see a need for it. I mean, I think the web is a public place. I mean, I don't know. It's not a public physical place, but if it's a government site that anyone can get on from a home or a library, the same place where you can go to FedBizOps, and yeah, that's a public place.
Well, and I would assert it's more public than on base these days.
Yeah.
I would agree with that 100%. I'm wondering at the dollar values here. So I see that above 25,000, you have to synopsize it in the GPE. Love that acronym. But if it's less than 25,000 but more than 15, it has to be posted in a public place. So I know 15 is probably the micro purchase threshold these days. I'm guessing.
No, it's 10.
Is it 10? Okay. What do government purchase cards, do they go up to 25,000 per transaction?
It depends.
Are these transactions that can just be acquired via a purchase card? Sorry, Jennifer, what'd you say?
Well, I can let Don answer, but it depends. Like you can use a purchase card up to 25,000 in certain instances, but certainly the 10,000, you wouldn't, in theory, you don't need to post, but it depends on how the installation or organization is running their purchase card program. I mean, they can encourage competition, and in some cases they probably should, because just not paying attention to all of your purchases up to 10,000 is not really prudent business either. So it varies is the bottom line.
Well, where my head was at, and you guys can correct me, I'm kind of a little on thin ice here from my knowledge, but if these are potential P card transactions, should some enterprising IG or GAO auditor take a sample of those transactions and go back to the contracting activity and say, show me where these were posted publicly? I mean, wouldn't that just be a beautiful report they could issue about how it was being violated?
Well, they certainly do that, not on purchase card transactions, but they certainly do that. I mean, this is like one of those classic findings on any kind of audit is, and especially recently, because nobody has a public place that's even accessible. So the, reviewers will come in and be like, well, show me where you posted all of your actions between 15,000 and 25,000 in a public place. And this was actually several years ago, back before the internet was even as ubiquitous as it is now. But I actually had a supervisor who, she went out and bought, she spent government money on this, weatherproof board, and she got all the actions, and this was just for the review. She did it just for the review. She got all the actions that were, between 15 and 25,000 that were current. She even got some old ones to make it look more authentic, and she, put them up there, and she put them out there so that when the reviewers showed up, she could, escort them. And she carried it clear outside of the base, because at that point in time, the base we were on was a little more restricted. And, she carried them out there. And so, we got out of that without a finding. But it was complete false. It was just, in my mind, it was a complete waste of money and time,
Well, I'm not advocating it, because what I'm really getting at is, if they're going to be P-card transactions, you want them to be as efficient as possible. That's the whole theory of why you're buying via a P-card, right? And so this notion that we're going to have to hold up your P-card transaction while we post it, just it's counter to policy, it seems to me.
Well, there are exemptions. So let's see, it says contract officer need not comply with the display requirements. When the exemptions there's some exemptions here. When oral solicitations are used, or when providing access to a notice of proposed contract action and solicitation through the GPE, and the notice permits the public to respond to the solicitation electronically. So I think in the Navy, and maybe probably some other agencies, maybe the Army, they'll just put these on FedBizOps or their internal site. Like Navy has NECO, Navy Electronic Commerce Online, and they'll just put those there, and then they don't have to do public display.
Well, I think that's what Jennifer was originally suggesting, Don, something very much like that, which is the most public place to post it is on the internet, right? Assuming people can find it on the internet. So if that's true, then all this stuff about a public place is just nonsense.
Yeah.
It's like a holdover from, the Cold War. Let it go.
Yeah, well, and I feel like even when I worked for the Navy, especially OCONUS, like they have Euro NECO and Asian NECO. And so how many European vendors are going to even be aware of Euro NECO? So in a way, it was almost a pre-qualification to backdoor sole source to some preferred vendors. In a way, it depended on how much outreach occurred or whatever. But I feel like it's the same thing with NECO. Like, why do they still have NECO in the United States when they could just use beta SAM or SAM or whatever? So, and in my mind, again, like I just think that this whole publicizing and synopsizing and these timeframes can certainly be re-looked at. And I think that was the goal when they introduced FAR Part 12 for sure, because they were like, well, hey, certainly if you're buying something that's commercially available, you shouldn't have to wait this whole time. Which is, actually one of my other issues is like when they did first do FAR Part 12. Well, wait, do you want to say anything else about? Okay.
I'm just looking up there's a FAR case for Part 5 right now.
So when they did FAR Part 12, they came up with this combined synopsis solicitation as a way, I guess, of satisfying this Small Business Act requirement and this synopsis requirement, but still having a solicitation. And this language is prescribed at, I don't have the exact citation, but for 12. What is it? 12.6, is it 603?
Yeah, combined.
Yeah, so 12.602, I think, or yeah, 603. So, and again, this was published back in the days of the Commerce Business Daily, and so it prescribes like this very condensed language for having a combined synopsis solicitation. And it tells you, you need to use this text. And then it says, this was one of my pet peeves. It says, the SF 1449 is not used. It doesn't say thou shalt not use an SF 1449. It just says it's not used. Well, the reason it's not used, and again, nobody's like rethought this ever since then, but the reason it wasn't used is because you literally could not publish a form in the Commerce Business Daily. And the reason you couldn't publish the full clauses or the full specs or whatever is because there was a character limit. I think it was like 3,000 or 5,000 characters. And I remember doing my first combined synopsis solicitation and going in and taking out, like unnecessary words so I could fit it into the character limit. But now there is no character limit and there is no, you can post a form. And so in my mind, I just feel like, why don't we just allow the full solicitation to be posted? Because I would think, and Nick can shoot me down as I say this, but I would think that a contractor would prefer the full solicitation, including the 1449, instead of some weird condensed language that you have to dig around.
Of course, obviously. And again, why are you the only person bringing this up? I mean, these are obvious points for improving the acquisition system. They're not major, but they're low-hanging fruit. Why doesn't someone go for the low-hanging fruit and, what do they say? Get some quick wins.
That's a good question.
Somebody gets to brief up to Congress on how our acquisition efforts are going. Here's a list of things we did.
I think
find any FAR cases on
these are open FAR cases, and the majority are going to be implementing executive orders and statutes.
Well, and I think that's exactly what the FAR and DAR Council are doing, is they're just implementing new stuff, and nobody's going back and rethinking any of the old stuff.
Right. I think there needs to be a committee, like a standing committee, that kind of monitors how rules perform, right? Like, are they getting the results they were designed to get? And if not, what changes need to be made to get those results? And also, look for obsolescence. Maybe there's certain rules that just we don't need anymore.
I'm not in favor of creating new committees. I think we got enough of them. And I'm remembering what Robert Heinlein said about committees. Committee is the only known form of life with more than one head but no brain. So maybe, but it should also be part of the FAR councils to do that. That should be, and if not them, then OFPP, for heaven's sake.
Yeah, that is OFPP's job, is to oversee, coordination between all the rules. Yeah. But they don't do that.
It is. So we have entities who already have this within their responsibility and authority. They're just not doing it, and no one's holding them accountable. All right. Well, that's a good comment.
So my last, I think we only have time for one, maybe we can squeeze both things in, but so did you guys get a chance to look at those FAR and DFARS clauses that in my mind are like complete overlaps of each other?
No. What were they
because
again?
I read and reread, because they're worded slightly differently, but basically it's the telecommunications one. So it's in FAR, they're prescribed, the FAR clauses are in FAR 4.21, and the DFARS clauses are in 204.21. 252, 204, like 20. I think it's 17.
I didn't look at them either, but are these the ones that came in from different legislation?
No, I think they came in from the exact same legislation. I think, as nearly as I can tell, what happened is that, because it's the NDA, it's the John McCain National Defense Authorization Act that I think put both of them into play. But I think what happened is they the NDAA required DoD to implement it first. So DoD rushed out their clauses. And then the civilian agencies, the FAR, had a little bit more time to implement it. And so they came up with their language, which is, you know, a little bit more comprehensive, generally speaking. But they, again, you read them and it's like the provision, the certification or the representation is exactly the same, essentially. So, so essentially, it's let's see if I have it here handy. So the provision is, well, there's two provisions actually. The one at 52204-24 is redundant to 252-204-7017. So if I had them like on one screen and the other screen, and I'm like, I'm pretty sure it's the exact same thing. And so do contractors encounter that? I mean, it seems like like sadly, contracting officers just are like, oh, it's prescribed, throw it in. But since I've been reading the clauses much more carefully because I'm teaching a class on it, in my mind, I'm like, this looks like the exact same thing. Why is this still required?
So I hear what you're saying, and the fix is obvious. The DAR Council needs to eliminate the duplicative clauses if it's duplicative with what's in the FAR. But I'm going to address your question. Do contractors pick this stuff up? Sometimes, but not often, is my answer. It's not. I guess the answer would be if I'm complying with the clause requirement, I don't care whether there's one clause or four clauses. I'm still going to comply with the fundamental requirement. So the fact that the government gave me duplicative clauses, you know, just doesn't matter. I don't care how many clauses tell me to do something. I'm just going to do it one time anyway. But I also want to quibble with your point that contracting officers just put in clauses because they're prescribed. Is that what they do? Because my impression now is they push a button and a machine spits out clauses that have been programmed to be prescribed.
Well, sometimes they don't do a very good job of it, which is why I wrote a whole class to try and make it easier. And sadly, you know, like I'm a perfectionist, so even in hindsight, I'm like, oh, I've been using this clause all wrong all these years, you know. And I was always very proud of myself, as you know, I would be very like, oh, I totally know my clauses, and I did better than most. But you know, it's kind, you know, again, it's very eye-opening to see how these clauses are supposed to be used, and then how much redundancy there is amongst some of the clauses and so on.
Oh yeah. Well, it is redundant, and they ought to eliminate the redundancy. But contractor, I don't care. You can tell me 5 times. I'm only going to do it once.
But doesn't it bother you? I mean, because this is what would bother me, because especially these clauses, because like a backhaul communication system and whatever. I mean, it's very confusing if you're not necessarily like a telecommunications expert. And so trying to read slightly differently worded technical requirements and just to be sure that they're not actually different requirements. I mean, it seems like that's a lot of wasted time on the part of contractors.
So, as a contractor who gets these clauses from time to time, something like this, when I see the word information systems, I'm not going to read it. I'm not going to try to interpret it. I'm going to hand it off to my IT department. So somebody who has a master's in this topic, they're going to tell me what it means and what it means to them and how they're going to comply. And I'm just going to take their word for it. I'm not going to dig into. I got enough problem trying to figure out FAR Part 31, cost accounting standards, you know, all that, anything cyber, anything information, that's going to go off to a specialty department. Not unlike government property. I'm not going to try to figure out government property requirements. I'm going to hand it off to my government property SME.
So,
you know,
Don, I don't think this is the right one, although I think this one is redundant too.
I don't know these clauses. I'll never read them.
Can you scroll down to the -24, the 5220424? Because that's the one that. So if you.
I don't know if you heard me, Jennifer, but I am never going to read these clauses.
Yeah. So this one you would hand off to an IT person also because it has telecommunications.
What if? Yeah. Are these the Chinese manufacturer
Yes, yes.
clauses?
Well, basically it's the spying via telephone wires or it was fairly complicated.
So we're going to issue some internal command media. Don't buy from Chinese manufacturers, which, by the way, we had before these clauses came out. Believe me. So that's all we're going to do. I'm not ever going to read these clauses. Don't buy from any telecommunication provider from China. Don't do it. Prohibited. Right? Just like on the parties excluded list. Forget it. They're off. And everything else here, trying to interpret it and understand it, it's just noise to me. We're looking for, as a contractor, we're looking for what does it require? What action does it require of us? Or in this case, non-action. We're going to do that thing. No, you tell me one time, tell me 5 times. It doesn't matter. We're still going to do it to the best of our ability. Right? I mean, I don't know how else to answer you. I mean, I get that they're duplicative. I get the Dark Council could easily get rid of 2 clauses and claim a low-hanging victory here. But it never bothered me. Right? My experts are going to help me comply with it.
But think of how many trees we could save.
By not buying from China, we're not going to buy from China. Sorry.
That would make it easier. Just, the clause said don't buy from China.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think it's just China, but it is confusing.
China. 4 words.
Because it's not just the actual, because it's even little components, which is really hard these days because they do a lot of electronics for sure.
Right.
Yeah, that's why people go to jail for buying stuff from China and branding it as made in America. Yeah.
Well,
we already are working we're already looking at counterfeit electronics, and we're looking at false markings. And I just went to a briefing today at a contractor where they said that every component they buy, every microcircuit they buy, they've got a reference standard over here that's known good and made in America. And every batch they tear apart one to destruction and compare it against the reference standard. And if it doesn't match, the batch is thrown out. I mean, I'm not saying that's all contractors, but the big ones are freaking serious about this stuff. It is a known vulnerability, and they're quaking in the boots that they would be the one to blow it on behalf of DoD.
Yeah, well, in fact, I just actually discovered all of the specs for detecting counterfeit electronic parts, which are very, very well buried in one of the clauses. I was just like, who knew all these specifications were buried in these clauses?
Yeah. And there are a lot of contractors who are behind the curve on this. I don't want you to think I'm painting a picture of everybody. But it is, at this point in 2021, it is pretty well known that the companies that don't get on board this train are not going to be the vendors in a couple of years. Whether it's CMMC or some other variety of that, if you're not playing counterfeit electronics and cybersecurity really hard, you won't be the cream that rises. So their companies are investing a lot of money in this area, as they should. They do not want to be the next newspaper headline on this topic.
Well, I think we're about an hour, so
Yeah.
it probably is time to sign off.
Yeah. I got to pick up my son. All right. So this was a good one. Next time, I really like the interplay between you guys. Like, Nick wants to know how government works. He has questions about why government does things they do, and Jennifer has questions about why contractors do things they do, or what their impressions are of, government rules. We should think of, things like that.
Well, I had asked Nick, and maybe we could do a whole hour on this. I'd asked Nick to come up with kind of a list of his pet peeves about government solicitations, because I would love to hear from a contractor perspective about, like, obviously amendments is one of them.
I don't know if I can do that because I don't deal with solicitations that much anymore, right? I'll try. I'll try to remember to do it. Maybe will you send me an email and I'll try to remember to do it,
Like
Jennifer,
ask
and
around
get
OTAs that
yeah.
include FAR
We
clauses.
got a whole group of people. Yeah, we're generating. Actually, it's much fewer now. At one point, we were doing 1,000 proposals a year, but it's much smaller now because everyone's locking us into multi-year firm fixed price. Um, so, once you're locked in, they don't want you to repropose because your price will go up. Um, so I'll try. I'll try. My biggest pet peeve right now. Are we off? We're off
Let
camera.
me say goodbye to everybody. See you next
Bye,
time on the
everybody.
Acquivore podcast.